So about this time of year, you've got your tomatoes planted, they're growing well, you've got them trellised perfectly, and there's the first truss of flowers. It's so exciting until they start falling off one by one. And what's supposed to be little baby tomatoes is just a bare stick. What's going on? And what can you do about it? Hey guys, I'm Brian with Next Level Gardening. If you're looking to join an online garden community that offers tips, tricks, and support to help take your garden to the next level, you're in the right place. Get started now by clicking subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss anything. Now let's get growing. Okay, so I want to know right now in the comments, have you been having this issue? I know, and we'll get into why, but a little sneak preview, heat is a big one. And I know we've been having a heat wave northwest coast of the United States and some other places as well. So let me know if you're going through this problem right now. Are your tomato flowers falling off, or have they in the past? There's two reasons why your flowers are falling off rather than setting fruit. The first one, and it usually is around this time of year, is hot weather. So maybe you got some tomatoes and there was no issue with flowers falling off, and then all of a sudden it started happening. It's because the weather's too hot. Anytime the weather gets into the mid to upper 90s for many days at a time, your tomato goes into stress mode and it's just trying to survive. It's not worried at that point about passing on its seed to the next generation. And so it is going to focus on, keeping itself well. It's focused on keeping the leaves well as possible. You might get some tomato leaf curl, which we'll talk about in another video. It's definitely not going to put its energy into producing flowers, so it drops them off. At that point in its life, it's an unessential piece because it feels, I'm going to die, so I don't have time to set fruit and ripen fruit. Let's just try to survive. So what can you do in this situation? You can't control the weather, or can you? The first thing you can do is to put some shade cloth, about 35% shade cloth, over your plants on those hot days. And that could be just enough to carry them through. The second thing you can do is to time your planting. Now this is really only if you have a long growing season. You want to get your plants out and producing before the hot weather arrives. And so that means starting your plants indoors as early as possible before your frost date, and then have them ready. So maybe 8 weeks, even 10 weeks if you have a grow light, starting your plants indoors, and then as soon as that last frost date hits, get them planted out so they can continue to grow and hopefully produce fruit before that hot weather comes. Because remember, you don't need to have a fully ripened tomato before the hot weather comes. You just need for it to start the tomato process. So the flowers have to be on there, they have to stay on there, get pollinated, and then make a tomato. Once you've got a baby tomato on there, then if the weather heats up, future flowers might fall off, but whatever you've got growing there will continue to ripen. You could start later, start your seeds maybe in midsummer so that they grow, and then when it's early fall and you're starting to get the temperatures coming down, then when the flowers come on, you're going to get a fall harvest instead of a spring or summer harvest. So those are two ways that you can work with the heat that you can't control. The third way is just do nothing. Really, if you plant them and you don't have a lot of humidity, or you control the humidity with the aspirin trick, which I'll put a link down below for that. You're not controlling the humidity, but you're managing the way that it affects your plants in terms of disease. But you can plant regular time, maybe get a little bit of a spring harvest. Just batten down the hatches, keep your plant healthy throughout the heat, and then when it cools down in a month or two, a little bit at least, the tomato will pick right back up where it left off, and it will start setting those flowers, and they will remain on the plant, hopefully get pollinated, and give you some fruit. So that brings us to the second reason why your tomato flowers are falling off, and that is a lack of pollination. We've all noticed less and less bees in our garden. So the first thing we need to do is work on that. There are bees around. They may not be attracted to your garden because you might just have vegetables growing without flowers. Now, vegetable plants have flowers, but do they have enough to attract the pollinators, especially when we have a lack of pollinators? You need to make your vegetable garden beautiful to yourself, and it will make it beautiful to the pollinators. Plant lots of open center flowers like zinnias, cosmos, daisies, basil, which if you go back to my companion planting video for tomatoes, you should have basil growing next to your plants anyway. And if you let some of those basil go to flower, I'm telling you, those are bee magnets. Bees love basil flowers. And I always plant green and red basil around my tomatoes. I'll put a link below to my companion plant video for tomatoes, so you can take a look at that if you haven't seen it already. But I always plant red and green. I let the red go to flower. It attracts the bees, and I keep the green non-flowering for myself. Now, pinch off the flowers on basil that you don't want to flower, like green basil, because as soon as they flower, the leaves actually become a little bit more bitter, and they don't taste good in a pesto or in a salad or on a pizza. So bring lots of flowers into your garden, and that will bring the pollinators. Now, sometimes either you haven't planted flowers and it's going to take too long for them to grow before your tomatoes start to need them. You'll have to be the bee. And so it's really easy. And there's a few ways to do this. On the low-tech end, just go by every day when you're going by your plants, walking through your garden, and just tap the plant. If it's growing in a cage, tap the cage. If it's growing up a string, tap the string. Tomatoes have perfect flowers, meaning they have the male and the female in every flower. And so pollen doesn't have to travel very far. So when you're tapping the plant, it creates a poof of pollen which lands on the stigma, fertilizes or pollinates the flower, and you'll get a tomato. Now you want to make sure you do this on a dry day. In the afternoon, preferably. In the morning, you might have some damp left from the night, or if it's been raining, it's not going to work. It's going to stick that pollen to itself, and it's not going to poof when you tap the plant. So try to pollinate between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. on drier, sunny days. The next way is with a paintbrush. Just take a paintbrush and go along to each flower and just give it a little brush. And that is going to be enough to transfer the pollen to the stigma. Now, this is a good way to do it if you have wet weather a lot and you can't get the poof. This will help transfer the pollen to the stigma even when it's a little damp. Now, if you have an old electric toothbrush on hand, that's a third way of doing it. The vibration of that brush is going to mimic the bees buzzing. And so if you just take that brush and go from flower to flower and just rest the bristles or just the backside of that toothbrush against the flowers, that vibration is going to be enough to transfer the pollen to the stigma and pollinate your flowers. Now you might be thinking, if I'm using the same paintbrush or the same toothbrush on every plant, am I going to get cross-pollination? Maybe, depending on what type of plant it is. But unless you plan on saving the seeds, that's not going to affect this year's fruit. Pollination will affect the seeds, which will affect next year's fruit if you grow them again. So yeah, you could get cross-pollination, same as with a bee, but you may not care. You know, if you're not saving seeds, then it really doesn't matter. Or if you like to toss the dice and see what kind of tomato you could come up with, maybe you come up with your very own variety that you love. So if you have problems with your flowers falling off, I hope this video helps. If you learned something, please give the video a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys next time.